CMR Group, and he has also served in NICE Toll Road, a project that is under the Kalyani Group. He's presently practicing as a chartered accountant. He is a registered valuer for the asset class SFA and is also a qualified insolvency professional registered with IBBI. He is empaneled as an insolvency professional with all major nationalized banks. At present, he is appointed as a RP in respect of one assignment and as a liquidator in respect of 2 other assignments under IBC. He has successfully concluded 5 CIRP processes under IBC. He's also serving as an independent director on the board of one of the Soma Group companies. He has been an examiner for the examinations that are conducted by ICAI and ICSI. With this brief introduction and background about the session speaker, I hand it over to Mr. Ravi Shankar Devarakonda, please.
Thank you, Shravan. So we'll, Shilpa, if you can permit me to share the screen, no? Okay. So you're able to see the screen now, no? Okay. Today's session, actually, we are doing the valuation, basic concepts and challenges during CRP process and liquidation process. I know that many of the members participating here are also insolvency professionals, but basically we are seeing this from the angle of a valuer, not with the angle of the RP. Okay, so the objective is basically that. So with that objective, we'll see how IBC's, so we'll have a brief touch upon of the IBC provisions also, but we'll see what are the challenges faced by a valuer during valuation of a company which is under IBC. There are, see, the IBC, I say for the other people who do not know about IBC, the IBC consists of the IBC code, insolvency and bankruptcy code, and then there are CRP regulations, then there are IBC rules, adjudication rules. But what we are basically concerned in the whole of process is that the IBC code, insolvency and bankruptcy code 2016, and the CRP regulations, corporate insolvency resolution professional regulations, and the liquidation regulations. We are concerned with these 3 regulations, are act and the code and the regulations. So we'll start with, I am not dealing with the appointment of a valuer by a RP and those provisions I am not dealing with, because that is basically the job of a RP. Now, what is a fair value? See, to give a brief introduction, the IBC requires a RP or a valuer to provide him the support in arriving at a value for the project, which corporate debtor which is handling. The corporate debtor consists of his fixed assets, the land and building, plant and machinery, and certain current assets. That is a normal balance sheet asset side. So under IBC, the valuer will be valuing only the asset side of the balance sheet and not the liability side, because all the liabilities is a different ball game, because where the resolution applicant who wants to bid for the project, he takes over as many liabilities as he wants, but he takes over all the assets of the company. That's the whole concept of IBC.
Sir, so, can you enlarge your screen so that the participants can view it clearly?
This is large only.
This side arrow is there in that PDF.
Okay, I think then I have to minimize this. Okay. Right.
Yeah, better.
Okay. So what it speaks of is that the valuer has to value only the assets of the company, not the liabilities of the company, because by valuing the assets, the valuer is advising, basically he's an advisor to the RP, the resolution professional, advising him that the company is worth so much, the assets of the company is worth so much. So based on that, the liabilities will be assessed by will be as much as the value of the assets, that much only liabilities will be taken over by the person who is trying to take over the company. So if the company is, as of today, has say 5,000 crores of loan and only 200 crores worth of assets, so the person who is bidding for the company will bid it only for 200, and 200 worth of liabilities only will take over. Balance liabilities will be a haircut for the lenders of the company. Now, the regulation 2HB, the regulation here refers to the CRP regulations. Corporate, see, the whole process is divided into 2 parts. There is a insolvency resolution process where the RP tries to sell the company as a going concern to a prospective bidder, and there's a liquidation. If that fails, then it goes to liquidation. So liquidation process again is a different ball game, but mostly the RP will be continued as a liquidator. And if required, there will be a separate valuation there. The regulation 2HB talks of fair value. So while valuing the assets of the company, the valuer has to give him two values, a fair value and a liquidation value. So for this purpose, fair value means the estimated realizable value of the assets of the corporate debtor if they were to be exchanged on the insolvency commencement date. So the valuation has to be as on the date of insolvency commencement date, which is the date on which the NCLT admits the corporate debtor into insolvency, initiates the corporate debtor into the corporate insolvency resolution process. That is the date of admission of the case by NCLT. That is the date of the insolvency commencement date between a willing buyer and a willing seller in an arm's length transaction. So here again, the concept is same as what we have seen in IV standards or the CA Institute standards. Basically, it's a willing buyer, willing seller, and arm's length transaction, and a proper marketing. So here again, the RP is given almost a 180 days and sometimes extended by another 90 days, so totally 270 days. So that much time is given to the resolution professional to do a proper marketing of the project of the company, what he's doing a resolution process. And so that's why the valuer also has to consider that this is being properly marketed and the parties had acted knowledgeably, because here again, our resolution professional issues what is known as a information memorandum, which is equivalent to a prospectus for in a normal parlance. So with that prospectus and which gives the details of the entire company. So the person who is bidding for the company has a full knowledge of the company and is also given a chance to assess his own way. Apart from the valuer who gives the advises the RP, the persons who are bidding for the company, they can also do their own individual valuation of the company, assets of the company. And based on that, knowledgeably, prudently, the RA, resolution applicant, will submit his bid for the whole company. Then here, the definition of fair value as defined under IBC is the same as market value under IVS. And IBC requires valuation of assets only and not the liabilities of the company. So that is just we discussed already. And similarly, market value has to be the highest and best use. See, what happens in most of the cases is that in many cases, what we see also is that suppose a company like HMT in Bangalore or a tin factory in Bangalore. So those kind of companies may not be of any good market standing today. But if that land is put to highest and better use, then that is the value of the company. So in many cases, supposing you find a real estate which is a shopping which is a cinema theater in its heart of city. So if you continue to the cinema theater, you may not get any value for that. But if you convert into a commercial complex, you may get a better value. So in that case, again, the highest and best use. So that is the fair value of the company. And which may be continued, the market value has to be a highest and best use, maybe the continuation of the existing use or any other use if such conversion is permitted. So you can, if it's an industrial estate land, conversion may not be possible into a mall or something. So in that case, you have to do only the industrial use only, but another alternative use. Then we'll go to the liquidation value. Liquidation value.
One small doubt I have here.
Tell me.
Can we take that, Habu valuation for liquidation value, and fair value is the, whatever, say for example, business or hospital, whatever is the running industry, that value. Is it possible to take that view?
No.
Habu
no.
will be used only for liquidation value?
No. Habu should be used for both actually, because see, if you are, that's what I said. No, suppose you have a cinema theater in the city center. You have seen Galaxy Theater and so many theaters in city. If that company had gone to this one liquidation, that same project, this come into liquidation because the cinema theater doesn't have market. Okay, in which case he has to, even the fair value has to be based on the Habu principle only. So
the resolution plan can come, say for example, considering that cinema business will be stopped.
Will be stopped. That's the only way. That's the only way that it has to be. It has to be like that only. Otherwise, what happens is that's for cinema theater. Otherwise, you'll get into a paradox where the fair value is less than the liquidation value. Normally, the fair value should be higher, liquidation value should be lesser. Now, you will come into a situation where fair value is less, because if you want to run it as a cinema theater only, liquidation value will be more.
Sir, this is Subbarao. how the valuer knows, okay, they will do for commercial complex, or he may go for residential, or may go down, or he may leave it like that? How can we think that the resolution applicant or the corporate debtor will go for commercial complex? And how can we give that Habu rate?
No, that's why I said no. It has to be Habu rate. So the valuer has to supposed to know what is the best use for that particular piece of land. No, that's what I say. The example of Galaxy Theatre in Bangalore, which was removed, which was this one demolished, and then we had a commercial complex there now.
Now this is regarding physical assets, plant and machinery, etc. What about financial assets?
Financial assets, there is no alternate use. No, financial assets, what are they consisting of? They're consisting of receivables, cash and bank. Cash and bank is anyway actual value. Investments, you have to either sell them, say investment in a subsidiary. Okay, that again depends on the subsidiary's valuation. If the investment consists of shares in other non-group companies or non-core assets and all that, ideally investment should be in a subsidiary, otherwise some group company assets. So that has to be valued like a investment. In fact, the question should be other way only. Financial assets, there can't be any Habu principle also, in my view. Financial assets are just valuing only. The Habu principle applies only to the land and building, in a way plant and machinery. Some plant and machinery, supposing you are in a pharmaceutical industry, you are manufacturing some anacin tablet, suppose. Now today you feel that anacin is not having market, you have some COVID medicine as a market. So same this one machinery of the pharmaceutical company will have some cooking machines and boiling machines and that kind of things. Same things can be used for manufacturing some other formulation.
No, but in the valuation rules,
right,
that has come under the company law,
right,
they're specifically having a category called financial and assets.
Right.
They have a system for that. Could you elaborate on that?
Sir, sorry to interrupt. In financial assets also, receivable, if suppose some receivable recovery agencies are ready to take, then the value may different. There also the Habu value may go up.
No, it's not a Habu principle actually. It is only whether you want to recover directly or through an agent. That is the only thing. No, but it's not a Habu. I don't think that you can call it as a Habu principle.
We cannot call. But the value will differ instead of own recovery, but who are specialists in recovery agencies.
True. Yeah. So that's it. See, that's why, supposing you say 6 years, a 5-year-old recoverable. 5-year-old recoverable, if you want to recover, then actually the RP's tenure, as I said, is only 180 days. In 180 days or 270 days, he may not be able to recover anything that. By the time he sends a notice, that fellow files a case, all that may not happen. So in which case, it's better to factor it or send you to some new recovery agents and then.
But companies do have shares. Companies do have investment in shares and debt instruments and all that.
Right.
And there is, the valuation rules do cover a separate principle. Habu is probably not the applicable thing there. Right. But they also have even the AS standard 113 specifically deals separately and elaborately with the question of valuation of financial assets, which again becomes part of the valuation standards. And I think IVS also deals with the financial assets.
So now what do you want to say then?
No, I just wanted if you could elaborate on that, because this is only one category.
I would suggest let him complete his presentation first. Thereafter, we can have the question answer session. Then whatever he already explained, then we can put our questions later.
Another thing, what we are trying to understand in this session is about IBC and the valuation. We are not reading we are not reading IVS standards or CA standards in this session. This session is meant for understanding IBC with reference to valuation. Okay, so we'll restrict to this session to that scope only. If you want another session, then we'll ask Shilpa to have a session on IVS or CA related thing. That's a different issue. Okay, so we'll not go into that. Okay. Anyway, now we'll come to the liquidation value. Liquidation value means the estimated, what, Shilpa? Correct, no? Shilpa?
Correct, fine.
Okay, so here we restrict ourselves, otherwise 2.5 hours is also not sufficient to, if you are digressing into other detailed into IVS standards and all that.
Correct.
So then as I said, the IBC valuation requires two valuations. One is the fair value, second is the liquidation value. Liquidation value means the estimated realizable value of the assets of the corporate debtor if the corporate debtor were to be liquidated on the insolvency commencement date. Fair value means the estimated realizable value of the assets of the corporate debtor if the corporate debtor were to be liquidated on the insolvency commencement date. So the corporate debtor, if the corporate debtor were to be liquidated on the insolvency commencement date, So as I said, the insolvency commencement date is the date on which the NCLT admits the corporate debtor into CIRP, corporate insolvency resolution process. So that date, what is the liquidation value? Then what happens if there is subsequent event? Like what we all know, suppose it is admitted in January, then we have a COVID in March. So will the value come down? Value may come down. That's a different issue. But there is no question of second time valuation. The valuation has to be done as on the insolvency commencement date only. Then liquidation value under IVS is based on piecemeal basis. Under IBC, liquidation value is on a to F of Regulation 32. Regulation 32 defines how a company can be liquidated. It can be sold as a going concern, it can be sold as a piecemeal, it can be sold as a slump sale. So Regulation 32 gives us 5 options of how to sell, how a liquidation value, how a company can be liquidated. So based on that, the liquidation value is arrived at. Now only one question arises here is that if the company is liquidated as a going concern, you may have X value. If the company is liquidated as a piecemeal, so it depends on the how the in each corporate debtor case, the liquidator has to decide based on the situation whether he can try to sell the company as a going concern, or the company has to be sold as a piecemeal only, or the entire group of assets like that. But that decision he will take based on the situation then and there. So that means the liquidation starts today. Then he may think that, okay, first I'll try to sell the company as a going concern. Then he may fail in that. Then he may try to sell as a piecemeal or a group of assets. Then he may fail. Then he may sell as a piecemeal. So it depends on the various stages, one by one, it comes down into the order. But as a valuer, when I'm giving a valuation, should I view the valuation as a going concern? Because in the liquidation also, it's saying going concern. It says piecemeal. So what should we do? There is no special guideline for this as to whether valuer should give each scenario one liquidation value. That is not given anywhere in the IBC or any of our this one, because otherwise, as it is, if there are 5 options to liquidate, the liquidator cannot give 5 options for liquidation values also. So that is still a, okay, I don't say gray area, but that is an issue. But what we are normally doing is that in a practical part, we give the liquidation value as a orderly liquidation. If somebody liquidates the whole company as a this one, then we find then there is another problem here. Okay, the topic given is also what are the problems. Okay, so this is one problem what we are facing, what we may face. Okay, now the other issue is that if the company has to be liquidated as a going concern, then what happens? The entire company has to be valued. Now what is happening is that we are all now initially in the initial stages of valuation, there was only one person who was valuing the whole company. Then again, we were doing the valuation based on one person was taking over the entire valuation process and giving it to taking a group of other friends and then associates and doing it. But now that is all not possible. If I'm a financial assets valuer, I'm only financial assets valuer. Then there will be a land and building value. There's a plant and machinery valuer. Now put together, they can't be a going concern. Going concern means all the 3 things should have a synergistic value, which is not possible under the current scenario because each valuer is doing a separate valuation. But still, if the company is sold as a going concern, we are supposed to our own share how it's a going concern. Similarly, plant and machinery person will do his own share how it will be going concern. But if the 3 are joined together, the value may be slightly more. But that is somehow not captured in any of these valuation reports, unless there is the concept of valuation entities are also there. So if a valuation entity is given this chance, maybe that can happen. Otherwise, we are not supposed to, okay, we can say that I'm an associate of some plant and machinery land building, but we are not partners in that sense. So then should the valuer in liquidation have an opinion as to whether CD will be going concern, or should he depend on the decision of the COC guidance to keep CD as a going concern? Now, in the CRP, the underlying assumption is that company is a going concern. Now, during liquidation, the underlying assumption is that company will be liquidated only. It is not a going concern anymore. That is it. That's why the liquidation order, if you see, issued by NCLT, will say that on the date of liquidation, all the employees are dismissed, all the contracts are terminated. Like that is given, unless the regulation specifically says that unless the company is decided to be run as a going concern. Otherwise, all the employees and the contracts, everything will get terminated on that particular date, on the date of liquidation order. Now, whether that will happen or not, we don't know. The valuer is appointed on the 47th day of the CRP commencement date. So on that date when he's doing it, he has to assume that the liquidation means is a dissolution, orderly dissolution of all the assets only, all the assets, orderly sale of all the assets only. He can't say that at that stage. He can't presume that CRP is a going concern and the liquidation also may be a going concern. That he can't assume. So liquidation means even though the COC may decide to run the company and sell the company as a going concern, still the valuation figure given for the liquidation will be a liquidation value only. That is not based on a going concern.
That means DCF method of valuation, the chance of using that in IBC valuation is almost nil, no? Because we don't have any person to give projections, reliable or,
Madam, see what happens is that now, if you are talking of a small companies which are closed for the past 3-4 years, what you say is right. But if it is an operating company, like, okay, you can't take an example of SR Steel and all that, which have an operating plan for the next 10 years. But there may be other small MSME companies also which are there, which have a running business. Okay, so those people also can have a projection. They can definitely have at least 3-4 years projection, because as of today also they have still orders. Only there, see, the companies which are at least EBITDA positive, they can still run. If somebody is EBITDA negative, then you would have closed anyway. Okay, so at least
who is supposed to give projections?
No, management will be there. No, management is still there. Even the CRP process period also, the powers of directors are suspended, but directors are still there. Still the management is there. Unless, as I said again, most of the companies we find in Bangalore are closed 3-4 years back. They became NPA 5 years back only. So what we are doing is as a CRP, as a resolution professional, or as a liquidator, what we are doing is just a formality in most of the cases. But companies which are running, which are having operations regularly and sales, only thing is that sales are not sufficient to service the debt. That is the problem. Otherwise, there is a definitely sales minus the operating cost, the revenue, the current regular income minus the expenses is definitely positive. Then they still have a hope. So those kind of things you can definitely project. Okay. So unless, as I said, if it's a big company like SR Steel or Bhushan Power and that kind of companies will definitely have a long-term vision. No? So they can definitely make a. In fact, that's how you see those companies had a. They paid the entire security creditors, unsecured creditors, operation creditors partly paid. All that was paid in those cases because they had a good sufficient income to project, and they made a good. And then in those cases, the future business chances also revival also far better. Especially steel industry was doing very well at that time. That's why there is a huge so much of demand. Even the SR who was a defaulter, he also came back saying that he'll buy back the company with a bigger offer. So there are certain industries which are still doing well. Okay, particular company may have done bad. If the industry is doing well, there's a chance that he may get a better thing. Okay. Then we'll go to the next. Again, so the issue here is that should the valuer give separate liquidation value for each scenario? That's not possible. That's not required. And whether the company has to be though the liquidator has a chance of selling the company as a going concern during the liquidation, should the valuer again to consider something like that? In my opinion, no. Then we'll go to the next. Who is a registered valuer? Registered valuer means a person registered in such accordance with the. So in this connection, actually, there are 2 circulars issued by the IBC. There are 2 circulars issued by the IBC. One second. How do I go there?
You want to stop sharing this and change the window?
How do I do it?
Stop share.
Okay, stop share.
And then go to the other screen and then share that screen.
Okay, it's again coming to here only, no? Or can I? Okay, I got it. Okay. Okay, so I'll now you have this 13th August 2019 circular, okay, which says that which actually refers to the previous circular of 17th October 2018. These are circulars issued by the IBBI. So there's a circular dated 17th October 2018 in which they said that IBBI said that every valuation required under code or any regulation made thereunder is required to be conducted by a registered valuer. That is a valuer registered under IBBI under the company's registered valuers and valuation rules. This is directed that effect from 1st February 2019, no insolvency professional shall appoint a person other than a registered valuer to conduct any valuation under the code or any of the regulations made thereunder. So what it said is that only a registered valuer only can do this. Now, what happened actually at this stage? What happened is that many of the registered valuers thought that I'm a registered valuer. I'm a registered valuer. That's a fact. Now, but I'm a registered valuer only for a particular class of assets. So what happened in many cases is that one of the registered valuers was taken as a lead registered valuer. He was given the assignment and he was asked to collaborate with his teammates who are the land and building registered valuer and a plant and machinery registered valuer. So when that was happening, the IBBI came with this circular. Since, okay, we are all appointing, all the reports are getting by the registered valuers only, but one of them was acting as a lead registered valuer. At that stage, this circular has come, which said that the registered valuer actually means only the registered valuer for that specific section only. That means the IRP can't appoint one lead person to take the assistance who can take the assistance of others. He should appoint 3 registered valuers instead of 1. Similarly, and since RP has to appoint 2 registered valuers, and effectively it became 2 into 3, 6. So that is this circular. And okay, funny thing about this circular also is that this circular is a direction to the RP, resolution professional. So what happened is that the punishment, the clarification, the explanation was not called from the registered valuers who took up the valuation like that. The explanation was only called from the resolution professionals. So that's how these people, there is no notices that were received by the registered valuers. The notices were received only by the registered this insolvency professionals only.
That means if there is any valuation entity, say LLP or a company with all categories of valuers,
right,
that entity can be appointed?
Yes, they have to register with the IBBI as a valuation entity.
They can be appointed.
They can be appointed for all the 3 classes. That's the see, unlike a IPE, insolvency professional entity, the registered valuation entity has a better chance because they are actually they can do all the 3 provision, 3 aspects, and then they can give a, as I said, no, in fact, the other one there also is that when you do a entity can consider all the other what you call the synergy value also they can actually do. Whereas when you give it to individual people, they can't. Okay, then we'll come back to this. So registered valuer means a person registered as such in accordance with the Companies Act 2013. So this we should read along with those 2 circulars. One is October 18 and one is the March 19. So these 2 circulars say that again, that also clarifies the same thing, but it gives a more clarity in the sense that registered valuer does not mean a general statement. Registered valuer for a specific class of assets. And in that context, so registered valuer SFA, registered valuer plant and machinery, land and building. 3 people should be appointed in place of 1. Then appointment of registered valuers. Anyway, this is just a theory part of IBC only. So within 7 days of the resolution professional should appoint within 7 days of his appointment, the RP resolution professional should appoint the valuers. Earlier, the rule was that the IRP, that is within 7 days of the insolvency interim resolution professional only should appoint. Now it has been changed to resolution professional, which gives him at least 37 days now, and but not later than 47th day. But as a valuer, what we should know is that your appointment order should come from the RP only, not from the COC or from the company. So if the COC issues it or the company issues it, that's not valid. You have to be issued, you have to issue the valuation appointment letter. Normally, you have to be appointed by the board or the audit committee. In this case, you should be appointed only by the RP only. And our valuer should not be a relative of resolution professional. He can't be related party of the corporate debtor. He can't be auditor, or he can't be partner or director of the IRP entity, IP entity also. That's the general thing. Then should RP appoint 2 values or 6 values? This we already discussed. So as per the 13th August 19 provides as under. So that's what this I have shown you already. So there is a 17th October 2018 and a 13th August 2019 circulars, which say that as of today, the rule is that RP should appoint 6 valuers, 2 plus 2 into 3, 6 valuers, or 2 entities which do all the 3. If the entity is doing all the 3, he can appoint them, and otherwise it will be 6 as per this. Anyway, that again, we are just clarifying that also. So register value, this is because number of register values to be appointed is because of a combined reading of circular August 2019 and 17th October 2018, which provides that RP should be appointed only register values for the valuation of the IBC. So which essentially means that you have a FA1, FA2, LNB1, LNB2, plant and machinery 1, plant and machinery 2, totally 1 and 2. Then you have to average this, average of LNB, average of FA, average of FP and M. So average of the total value. Now, for the RP, what the IBC code says is that if the valuation between the two values significantly differs, if there is significant difference in each of the individual asset category level, the third value should be appointed wise for that category. That means if the FA1 gives 100 rupees and FA2 gives 80 rupees, then we normally call it, if the difference is more than 15 to 20%, we'll call it a substantial difference. So if the difference is more than that, then the RP has to appoint a third valuer. So what normally that will come back. What normally is done in those cases is that if the valuations is too high, the gap is too high, the RP normally discusses with the valuers as to why this high difference is coming. Because the difference should not be more than, it should be reasonable, because reasonable in the sense that 10 to 15% is what is considered as normal. But if it is more than that, then the RP has to appoint third valuer for that particular category at least. Then what happens is that then...
Sorry to interrupt. 3 buckets you are telling: land and building, plant and machinery, and financial assets. Right. So if these 2 goes away, what is the residue? Everything comes under financial assets, right? Inventory, investments, everything comes under financial assets.
Patent, goodwill. That is a general understanding.
Everything, trade receivable, everything.
So for all those things, our registered, normally the registered valuation rules or the Companies Act, those things apply anyway.
Okay. So other than these 2, everything comes under financial assets.
That's a general principle. There's nothing defined for that in the IBC code. Mm-hmm. For that, you have to go back to our normal valuation rules only.
Okay. Thank you.
Sir, I had one question with respect to appointment of registered valuers. You said it has to be within 7 days or not later than 47 days from insolvency commencement date.
Right.
So insolvency commencement date is what?
So I told, no, madam, see what happens is that, okay, if you see the IBC code, how it works is that supposing 1st June, I file an application NCLT. Normally the hearing goes on for 5 to 6 months. Say 1st January, the case got admitted. Okay, that is the insolvency commencement date. On that date, the NCLT appoints a interim resolution professional for a period of 30 days. So that interim resolution professional has to initially do the initial works and then constitute a committee of creditors and hold his first meeting within 30 days. Suppose 30th January, he holds a meeting. In that meeting, he either confirms the IRP as an RP, that means interim resolution professional as an RP, or they can appoint a new RP. If the same IRP is continued as an RP, then he already has a grip of the whole company. So the Act says that within 7 days, the RP from that 30th day onwards, he becomes an RP. So he within 7 days of the RP date, he will appoint the valuers. But in many cases, what is happening is that the IRP is not confirmed as an RP. At the same time, they don't appoint a new RP also. So those cases are the data issues where the 47 days concept comes into picture. Because the Act also says that, the code also provides that the IRP should continue till an RP is appointed. Sometimes the RP appointment, now ideally it should be within 30 days. Sometimes it goes on to 6 months also. Suppose the COC does not permit and so many problems are, there is a problem of the RP. So we are not concerned about it that at this juncture. But in those situations, the IRP will continue as an RP, as a deemed RP. But this designation is still IRP only. But he has to do all the activities of an RP, including preparation of IM, information memorandum, that prospectus, whatever I said, and the appointment of valuers. So in those cases, 47 days. But so if the IRP is appointed as an RP, 37 days.
So there is no deadline for registered valuer to give the report? In how many days registered valuer has to give his report?
Okay, so that I'll come back, Amma. We'll see that.
Okay.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
So a plant and machinery valuer and an SFA valuer, if someone is having both registration, he can do the valuation of the same company for both the classes of assets.
I think this, I doubt that, because see, like I'll tell you, I'm a chartered accountant and company secretary. Can I practice both? No. Normally that's not permitted. I'm also not sure about this valuation. See, I'm a chartered accountant, company secretary and cost accountant. Can I practice three? No. That is because the logic is that I'm supposed to concentrate on one field so that I can be expert in that. So while practicing, I don't think one can do both.
But you are allowed to appear for these things, exam and quality.
I also passed all the 3 exams.
No, but this is under regulation, no, sir. But I was told that it is possible.
No, but
what I'm asking is, you can do both practices. That is not. I'm not having the doubt whether you can do it for the same company is what I'm asking.
If you can.
But I've got the clarification. You can practice both.
Okay.
I am already a plant and machinery valuer. I'm pursuing as an SFA now.
Now, what, Shilpa, is it permitted like that, or even I don't know? Subara?
I was told that it is permitted, sir. I asked this question
I've
before
seen many
enrolling.
people, land and building and plant and machinery, both valuations they can practice.
Yeah, even land and building and SFA also, there are, our students are there.
No, there are several people who are engineers and cost accountants, engineers and MBS. Several people are there, so they can pass both.
I'm an engineer and a cost accountant, sir.
So
if one person is having multiple asset class registration, they can do valuation both the class simultaneously. There is no issue in that.
Even for the same CD,
Yeah.
Same company.
Yeah, I'm insolvency professional as well as registered valuer also. So I have worked with one of the valuer who is a land and building and plant machinery valuer, and I was a SFA valuer. So both of us done valuation simultaneous. Myself for the SFA class and the other person for the land and building plant machinery, both put together by a single person. And because he has got the registration for both the classes, IBB has permitted him. So I don't think there is any conflict in that case.
Okay. So to answer your question, you can do both in the same company.
Yeah.
Both can be done in the same company.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, sir. Thank you.
So I have a question here. In the case of for financial assets, it's largely a valuation of a going concern, right? Because there could be non-operating asset, which could be actually a land or a building. And so going concern is what is the scope for a financial assets valuer. And rest of the things can, depending on what kind of asset, it can go to a land and building or a plant and machinery or a SFA. Other than valuation of a going concern, what is...
No, other
so
than...
I repeat myself.
I'll tell you. I understood something like this. Okay. Supposing you have GST input credit. Okay. If you are the company is a going concern, you'll get the benefit of the input credit. If the company liquidates, you will not get anything out of it. Okay. So like that. So like if you have a receivables which are a going concern, suppose you continue the business with him, you may be able to recover it. But if you are closing the business, you may not recover full amount. You may have to recover only 70, 80, 60, 70% of it and close it. So that's how if the company is a going concern, the chances of recovering more money. The company is not a going concern, company is going to liquidation, the chance of recovery are less. So that's why the going concern will be more for SFA. The going concern, the liquidation value will be less.
No, I'm asking from the scope perspective. So I'm an insolvency professional and I'm identifying valuers for various asset classes.
Right.
So for the financial assets, if the company is shut down right now and there are no inventory or receivables, then still if you have to identify a SFA valuer, the only scope is value as a going concern. Otherwise, there's no scope, right, for SFA value?
No, you mean to say there are no SFA assets in that company, or there are some assets?
No, one second. So
are there any financial assets or no financial assets?
No, there is no inventory, there is no receivable.
Then actually he need not even appoint a financial assets valuer.
Who does the valuation as a going concern then?
No, sir.
Can I add my view here? When there is no financial assets other than the cash or bank balances, there is no need to go for the valuation via the SFA. That is where the matter is clear. Now, the second part of the question is, for going concern, whether that can be, for that purpose, the registered valuer for the financial asset is required to be appointed. That's a different perspective. Now the thing is, whether the other assets, whether the land, building, plant, machinery, are able to work in a tandem as a group of assets for keeping the company as a going concern. In that case, RP can appoint a SFA valuer, giving him the background that look, though there is no debtors or other financial assets, but since there is a projections, there is a the company is in a position to run as a going concern, you may please give me the valuation. In that case, the RP need to be instrumental in providing the projections and the future outlook, which he can take the help of the management and all those things. In that case, that going concern valuation can be done. But what happens normally in the companies where there is no debtors or there is no other assets, in that case, normally it is fine that the company is not actually running as a going concern.
It's not even operating actually. That's what it means.
And in that case, it's unlikely that there will be a case of a going concern valuation at all. So that is where it is not required.
But actually, you're right, sir. And in that case, where if there are no debtors, no financial assets at all, there is no need to appoint a financial assets valuer. So in many cases, there will be no land and building. I don't appoint a land and building valuer also.
So technically, why I ask this question is a rational thought process, because the principle of entire IBC that we would like to keep it as a going concern. Step number one. Step number two, a receivable or inventory may not be there because for whatever reason the erstwhile management would have done goof up. If you were to, on paper they might be there, but if you were to recalibrate after audit, they may not exist. To that extent, inventory or receivable doesn't exist. But when you said the plant, the RP's call, it's a running plant. So unless you make projections and unless you have a going concern value, which only an SFA can do, I thought that irrespective of the financial assets on paper being there or not, a going concern value is a must.
So let me answer your question. Okay, now I got it. See, the valuer who is appointed, even when appointed as an SFA valuer for a company, okay, I'm going to value the assets. Okay. Projections given by management is a different concept, but even if the management gives me projections for valuing those projections, you don't need a valuer. For the projections given by management, you don't need a valuer for that. Okay, but if there are assets, then there is a valuation required. If there's no asset, suppose the company doesn't have land and building. Now you can't suppose, and I make a projection saying that with this I'll bring in some money. With that money, I'll buy a land and building. Then for that purpose, you don't need a land and building valuer. Or if I say that I'll add one more machinery. In my projections, I show that I am buy some more machinery. Then you mean to say I need a plant and machinery valuer? No. So unless there are assets, in my view, unless there are assets,
I agree. Until the company is in a running situation, it is unlikely that going concern valuation is required to be done.
If the balance sheet has assets, we appoint valuers. If the balance sheet does not have any asset, no valuers. And then they will answer your other question.
So thank you.
To answer your other question, the company has to be run as a going concern during CRP period. That does not mean that every company has to be run. If the company is operating, then I continue it as a running company. Suppose the company has stopped operations 3 years back, then I can't. There's no point in. There's no way that it can be run as a going concern. Okay.
So to summarize what you said, just to reconfirm myself, if in the books there are no assets, financial assets, there is no obligation to appoint a SFA valuer.
Perfect.
Because all projections, what you do is internal in nature. Right. But then the definition of the liquidation value is A to F, where effort is to sell as a going concern. That you are saying is because the company did not have any projection, there is no concept of going concern as an effort in the liquidation value assessment.
True.
In the liquidation value A to F, one of the principles is it should be a going concern value.
No, see, that's not a principle, sir. If there's a chance, please continue. That's what it says. The entire IBC says that if there is a chance of running the company as a going concern, please do it. But then there are several IBC cases where in second month only we'll pass a liquidation order and close the whole thing. Okay, then you don't need to run the entire period as a going. When the company is nothing, there's nothing in the company. Then from directly from CRP, we wanted to dissolution also. You don't need anything to do anything there. So we didn't appoint any other valuers except one valuer, which is suppose only receivables, no plant and machinery, no land and building. We didn't appoint anybody. Or if you are left with, suppose you go to a software company, entire thing is only receivable, and what you have is only some laptop and mobile phones kind of thing. So there also you may have to appoint one plant and machinery person, or some financial assets person. That's it. No land and building also. If the entire office is in leased office, you don't need land and building. Then you can't say that I had to appoint all the three categories. That's not mandatory. Depending on the requirement, he'll appoint 1, 2, or 3.
So coming back to your question, coming back to your point which you told, no, in after IRP, after COC, straightly it can go into liquidation. Just that process I'm asking. Without going into RP, resolution plan, everything, straight it can go now, or else it will go through that, and then after failure only it will go.
Sir, there are several cases where directly after appointment, the IRP saw the balance sheet, saw the register office of the company. Register office company is in some co-working space. So there's nothing that you can do. There's no land and building anything. Okay, leave it. So that means that is zero. Then there are no assets at all. And then even there is nothing to pay, even the valuer's fees also, there is no money in the company. If that kind of situation is there, directly I can go to NCLT and say that, sir, in this company there is nothing. So I want to liquidate today only. So that also NCLT is permitting.
Okay, thank you, sir.
There are several cases like that which was permitted directly.
Ravi Shankar, I had a question. Yeah, so it seems to be fine that if the balance sheet does not show any financial assets, then you need not appoint a SFA. But who does the due diligence that there are no assets per the contract, such as some license rights and so on?
RP is there for that only, no? RP is the coordinating the whole thing. There is a professional is coordinating the whole thing. He has to assess whether there is any requirement. Suppose the RP feels that there is no license, nothing, and says he doesn't appoint. Tomorrow, somebody finds that there is what you call patent or goodwill, something for the company. Then he can go to NCLT. Sir, this RP failed in his duty. He did not. Then there's a goodwill. He did not value for that. So RP is always afraid of that, and then.
And RP can take help on that from legal people or something to find out if there's any value on license. And
one is going to a lawyer and then taking an opinion. Instead of that, if he has such kind of doubt, he better appoint a valuer only, in my view. Instead of paying 20,000 to a lawyer and getting an opinion, pay 20,000 to a valuer and get him only directly on board. Okay, that may be a simpler way for him. But ideally, if he has any doubt that there is an asset, he can appoint somebody. Maybe that valuer will again come say, show me. Suppose you say suppose RP gets a doubt there is a patent in the name of the company. Then you appoint a valuer. Valuer comes, is the patent registered? Patent is earning any money out of the patent, or is the patent any future scope of earning money in that? He will see all that and finally gives a zero value. Okay. So if that means there is a doubt there is a patent, but actually there may not be anything. That kind of thing. Suppose you may see that books may have a goodwill. In the books there may have a goodwill. So you have to appoint a valuer. Valuer may say that company is already in CRP, all the goodwill, whatever is after books, there is a waste thing. So it's actually right of position. So he may say zero value to that. Okay.
Live example is Kingfisher brand, which was nobody was taker of that value, that brand. So it can be zero also.
It can be zero also. That's true. Okay. Then we'll go to regulation 35, fair value and liquidation.
I think let him complete his presentation. We will have the interactive discussions, and we can take the subject by subject and we'll discuss. That will be a better approach.
Right. Most of these things, some of these things I would have covered later also.
Yeah. Let's wait and see his presentation first. Please.
So next is 35, regulation 35, fair value and liquidation value. Anyway, as I said, he has to determine the fair value and liquidation value shall be determined in the following manner. 2 registered values to be appointed. In fact, as we discussed already, 2 means actually now 6. So both all these 2 valuers for each class will appoint. They'll estimate a fair value and of the liquidation value computed in accordance with the internationally accepted value standards after physical verification of the inventory and fixed assets of the corporate debtor. So they are supposed to be physical verification, which is a part of our normal IV standards or CA Institute standards. Then if in the opinion of the registered professional, the two estimates of a value are significantly different, he may appoint another registered valuer, and who shall submit an estimate of the value of the computed in the same manner. The average value of two closest estimates of the value shall be considered the fair value of the liquidation or the liquidation value, as the case may be. So he has to appoint a third valuer, and then he has to, suppose one gives 100, second fellow gives 85, third fellow gives 70. So 70 and 85 are more nearer than 100 and 85. So actually both are same. Okay, in this case both are same, 15 only gap. But the closest two estimates he has to take and then take an average of that. That is the fair value and liquidation value. That's how the valuation is estimated. But the problem what happens is that normally the valuers are appointed after 37th day, and actually somebody else was asking how much time is the valuer given to finalize his appointment, his report. So what happens is that why are the valuations being done? The valuations are being done so that the same can be compared with any bid that may be received by the liquidator, by the resolution professional. Normally the bids have to be received within 135 days. That's what I remember correctly. So from the date of commencement. So if you are appointed within 37 days, you will almost get something like 100 days to complete the valuation. But after completing the valuation at that stage, if the RP or liquidator finds that there is a gap, huge gap, then he has to appoint a third valuer. Then the RP gets into a big problem, because once the resolution plan comes, the RP has to disclose this liquidation value or fair value to the members of the committee, because so that the committee of creditors can compare the fair value and liquidation value with the resolution plans, that is the bids received. Suppose the assets are worth say 100 crores of fair value and 90 crores of liquidation value. And then if the bids come for 150 crores, then the lenders have benchmark that the value is asset value is 100. I got a 150 crores of bid. Or suppose the bid comes for only 75 crores. Then the lenders know that, okay, I got only 75 crores bid. Whereas if I liquidate the company, I get 90 crores. So he'll decide against the plan. So that is the objective of the whole valuation exercise only in the scheme. Now, if after going through these 100 days of valuation and all that, because in fact, in many companies, if the project is on 2-3 sites and all that, they have to go to the sites, do the verification, whether the assets are in the name of the company or not. All this verification he does, then gives a report, and then they find that there's substantial deviation. Then you appoint a third party. Third party, for him to do all this, if the first two people only consumed almost 70 days, then the second party may not have any such kind of a time also. So that is a practical problem which the second valuer, the third valuer will find it. So what normally RPs do is that they'll see why there's such a huge difference. Then they'll discuss with the valuers whether they have missed out any asset, whether they have considered anything. Suppose there may be a leasehold land, they would have taken as their own land, or any joint development right, they would have taken as their own right, or what. Or the area difference is there. Suppose somebody would have taken 100 acres, somebody would have taken 101 acres. So those kind of factual differences, they'll try to iron out and get a correct valuation so that they are reasonably near about. Otherwise, if they have to appoint a third valuer, then it's a big mess for the RP, and there's a severe strain for the third valuer. Both ways, it's very difficult. Then, after the receipt of the resolution plans, in accordance with the code of these regulations, the resolution professional shall provide a fair value and liquidation value to every member of the committee in electronic form. That I already said it. We said it. No? The objective of arriving at these valuations is to give the RP or the COC a benchmark, so that when the bids come, they have to value that, how to verify that. So that is the object of the whole exercise. So if that exercise, to fulfill that exercise, the valuer should give the valuation report sufficiently in advance. Normally we will get almost like 100 days time. The resolution professional and registered valuer shall maintain confidentiality of the fair value and liquidation value. So the whatever valuation is done, the entire exercise should be kept confidential. In fact, the general understanding is that one of each registered value should not supposed to talk to each other also, so that I should not know what you are doing, or I should not say that, okay, if you are taking 100 rupees, I'll take 90 rupees. We are not supposed to talk like that. So the professional and registered value shall maintain confidentiality of the fair value and liquidation value, both the values. And once the report is complete, he should only give it to the registered professional only, and to nobody else, not even to the fellow valuer. Then we come to the liquidation regulations. Whatever discussed so far is this CRP process. In the insolvency resolution process, we have seen this. Now we'll come to the liquidation regulations. So once suppose there is no plan received, or whatever plans received or bids received are not been admitted or accepted by any of the COC members, then the company goes into liquidation. So that means the CRP process, whatever we try to revive the company, that has failed. So it has gone to liquidation. So regulation 35, valuation of assets intended to be sold, where the valuation has been conducted under regulation 35 of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, or fast track insolvency. Then as the case may be, the liquidator shall consider the average of the estimates of the values arrived under those provisions for the purposes of valuation under these regulations. So is the liquidator duty bound to appoint a valuers again? No. If the liquidator feels that the whatever valuation done during CRP period holds good today also, then he did not appoint a valuer again. Supposing pre-COVID January 1st we appoint a valuer for CRP. Now the situation is totally changed. So you have to again appoint a fresh valuer in the liquidation process. But if the valuation is appointed, suppose the normal situation, land and building is there, so valuation was done and resolution process is run full 180 days or 270 days, nothing happened, so company went into liquidation. So there's not much change in the land and building or assets or plant and machinery, anything. Then he need not do a fresh valuation again. So that's what this is providing, saying that you don't need, the liquidator has to, he can either choice of considering the old evaluations done under CRP process in cases not covered under subregulation 1, or where the liquidator is of the opinion that a fresh valuation is required. So liquidator has to decide. If you have to decide, if the circumstances have changed substantially, then he can do a fresh valuation under the circumstances. He shall within 7 days of the appointment of liquidation commencement date. That means the liquidation order is issued on say 1st June. So within 7th June, he has to decide and appoint 2 registered valuers to determine the realizable value. So here is only a realizable value, which is akin to a liquidation value. So here he is doing only one valuation, whereas in the CRP process, he is doing 2 valuations because there is a chance that it may go as a going concern or it may go into liquidation. Whereas here we are already in liquidation. So we are talking of only realizable value in accordance with the A to F of the regulation of 32. That means that company can be liquidated as a going concern, all those things are there. So that valuation, liquidation value is what he is supposed to give. So there's only one valuation which is done during liquidation process. Provided that the following persons shall not be appointed. Again, same thing. If you are a...
1 minute, sir. Sir, is it possible that a company can go under liquidation without registered valuer's valuation report?
Yes. That happens. Several times it happens also. What happens is that supposing you appoint valuers, okay, daytime by say as I said, suppose the business is not doing and the plan, the fellow does not get any plan at all. The RP does not get any plan at all. Then you need not wait. See how the plan also happens is that the entire IBC process is again there is a step-by-step detailed mechanism so that RP does not deviate anywhere. Everything is time bound. Within 60 days, I have to do information memorandum, which is a prospectus. Within 75 days, I should publish a Form G, which is like an invitation to public to express their interest in bidding for the company. Out of them, again, I have to select some of them. So all this process is step-wise is there. Okay. The plan actually comes at the 135th day. But the list of people I have to finalize within say 75th day or something. Okay. But suppose up to 75th day, I don't get any name. Then I know that there is no 135 days requirement also. So in which case, suppose I don't get anybody who shows interest in the company. At that stage only the RP will say that go back to NCLT, sir, nobody has shown interest in the company. So I need not continue for the balance period also. Suppose on 100th day he decides that, so, okay, nobody came showed interest in the company. Then he can go to NCLT, sir, we liquidate it. But by the time the valuer might not have completed the valuation process also. So the valuation process will be suspended at that point. In which case, again, during liquidation, he has to appoint.
Okay.
So there are several times this happens.
Okay.
Shall be independent. Okay. Then the registered valuers appointed under subregulation 2 shall independently submit to the liquidator the estimates of realizable value of the assets of the business as the case may be computed in accordance. Okay. That is again. So whoever is appointed, again, he has to do a physical verification, then give a report. And the average of the 2 estimates shall be taken as the value of the assets of the business. Then method of valuation, again, standard. There's nothing specific in this. So it can be a market approach, cost approach, or income approach. So it depends. So there's also then land and building. We all know that. location wise amenities, what is infrastructure available, what is the disposable income affordability in that area, what is the commercial or commercial estate or residential or demand and supply in that area, recent registrations. So all based on all these things, the valuation of land and building is done. Similarly, for plant and machinery, you inspect the conditions of plant and machinery. So that's a technical how to do it. That there's no, IBC does not prescribe how you should do. IBC only says that you do it as per IBC's international standards and all that. So these are the general parameters considered for arriving at a plant and machinery value or land and building value or whatever it is, or a financial assets value. If the financial assets, receivables and advances, analyze the receivables based on the realizability, if not possible, based on the age-wise. The realizability, see, for most of these things, we need depend on the company only. Normally, what as a valuer, what we do is that we'll go to the company. Suppose there are 100 names of receivables. For 100 people, we'll ask the management, what is receivable as per you, what is, how old, basically we'll take an age-wise definitely. If it's something is which is more than 2-3 years old, then definitely there's nothing to come in that. And what is the assessment of the management? And then we have to see whether the assessment of management is reasonable or not. Suppose management always says that all this money will come in here, don't worry. But then we are supposed to make our own judgment and see whether those receivables are, in our estimate, how much is realizability of that. So you may think discount the management to assurances by 10%, 20%, we should see that.
Should
then
we send in this receivable, should we send a confirmation of balances like that, or we will have to apply our judgment there?
Judgment only, sir, because I don't think confirmation of balance is nothing, I don't think that will work out for you. Because even if I am a company for which I receive that kind of a inquiry from a valuer, normally we are duty bound to answer the auditor's requirements. Okay. But this kind of a thing is difficult. But I'll tell you other examples. Sometimes actually as a liquidator, as an RP, when I wrote to the parties to, as suppose books of account show that X has to pay the company, say 1 lakh rupees. Now, as an RP or a liquidator, I wrote letters to them to receive the money because there is the balance is showing as per books. They sent me a legal notice back saying that you are harassing me, all that. Okay. So most of the cases, because the other customer would have paid the company back long ago and they are not accounted in the books. So those kind of things are there. But to answer your specific question, will they respond to, are those people duty bound to respond to a valuer's confirmation balance? I don't think there is a statutory alter. Yes, we are as a matter of routine we respond, but I don't think that is possible for a valuer thing.
So we have to get the basic details,
analysis,
and only. Then use our judgment to arrive at.
Okay. That's it. Suppose there is receivables is one thing. Then similarly inventory, finished goods, how much they are, whether they are moving, non-moving, and all that. Similarly, work in progress, then raw materials, whether they are useful or not useful, how old are they, raw material in the stock.
Mr. Ravi Shankar, I would like to raise a point here in regarding the valuation of the inventory. Our SFA valuer are competent enough to do the valuation of inventory, because impairment and the quality aspects, we are not competent enough. And technical things are involved as far as the inventory is concerned. So in that case, SFA valuer, should they do the valuation or they should not do the valuation?
Sir, let me tell you one thing. Okay. I'll deal with it in two ways, sir. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, one is traditionally the only chartered accountants, even if you go to a bank audit, bank inventory, bank stock audit and all that, they have been giving it to only chartered accountants only. That means only financial persons have been doing the inventory as of tradition. One. Now, second aspect of it is, so that's how it has come to the SFA has come to the inventory has come to the SFA people. Now, as a group here, we can say that we can announce saying that, sir, we are incapable. These are technical aspects, give it off. So there are other people who are ready to grab it. Now, if you say it in the open, this one option, one area of scope of practice, what we have will go off.
No, that is there. But suppose the chartered accountants are doing valuation. What they do based on the certifications given by the management. They do
not by the management. Sir, no. So, sir, finished goods actually work in progress and raw materials. There is a purchase invoice. Supposing you have 10 items of raw material in the Almera, okay, which means that for each of them there is a purchase order which was bought recently, and okay, then there is a FIFO, LIFO methods. So all that process is there. Now we talk of a work in progress which is totally complicated. then you have every right to take the assistance of somebody. Okay, it's not saying that you should not take the assistance of anybody. That's not the IBS also is saying that you can take the assistance of somebody. And even what IBSCC also is saying is that you can take the assistance of somebody which is permitted under IBS. Now, only thing is that you can't take the assistance of a land and building valuer to do a land and building, or a plant and machinery valuer to do a plant and machinery. That's what the rule is saying. But to do the inventory valuation as of today is under the scope of SFA only. And to do that valuation, if you need a help, a power plant expert, power plant items may be different, or is land and building, whatever chemical plant, this may be different. But using the LIFO-FIFO to the extent of directly you can do, you do. If you can't do certain things directly, or you can't assess the market value today,
no, if the valuation is to be done by on a only document based, I agree with you. It can be LIFO, FIFO, or it can be last purchase invoice and all those things. But when the question of impairment and the quality inspection is concerned, I don't think we are going to do the valuation. Suppose it's agri company, the inventory is there of rice. Agri company, there is an inventory of grains.
Right,
So
paddy, sugar, those kind of things will be right.
So in that case, we are not competent, and we need to take the help of the experts in that case.
Sir, what the rule is also saying is that you take the help of an expert, but give a certificate from your name. So don't say that we are not. See, there are several things we may not be able to do, but then we'll take somebody's help and do it. So we are not saying that we are not the person to do it. That's not the correct. Okay, if you don't know something, I'll take other set of help and then technical help and then do it.
In case of realty company, the inventory is of the land and building. So in that case,
that's a special case. That's actually has to be inventory. That has to be only a land and building only.
And in case of oil refinery, again,
sir, excuse me, sir. Please allow him to proceed. No, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. Anyway, sir. So, but basically, as of today, inventory is with SFA people. So we don't want to leave it to somebody.
Sir, in case expert is required for inventory, who is supposed to appoint the expert? Is it the RP appoints him, or the SFA valuer only has to appoint him?
SFA valuer has to build it into his bid, into quotation. If I think that I need to appoint a expert with a 20,000 or 50,000 rupees, I want another 50,000, so I need to quote for 1 lakh. And if I quote only 50,000, then definitely RP will not give you extra.
But the other way around can also be accepted, right? If the RP only wants to appoint and he asks us not to include the inventory value in our SFA report, that is also acceptable, right?
No, that's definitely not acceptable, because SFA, see, we refer to the old circular, what I said it in the IBC, no? He is supposed to appoint only plant and machinery value for plant and machinery, inventory for inventory valuation person. Inventory valuation person is SFA person. So you can't appoint a plant and machinery for doing a SFA inventory valuation, because then that fellow will be in trouble.
Sure, thanks.
Okay. Then investments, market quoted investment is simple. Other investments means other investments valuation is a problem. That will come back, because other investments, if it's a closely held subsidiary, then how to value the subsidiary? So that again, you have to value the subsidiary, and then only you'll get the value of these investments. Similarly, cash and bank balances, there has to be actuals with a confirmation of the bank balance. Now, this is the theory part of the valuation. So simple till now it is a simple thing. Now when the topic was given, I tried to list out what all problems I faced as a valuer, as a RP, as a liquidator, where getting it valuations done through outsiders. That also I tried to list out. Then we'll discuss those points here. Okay. Is RP liquidator responsible for the valuation given by the valuers? RP liquidator should ensure that the valuer considers all the assets of the company during the valuation, but he cannot influence such valuation. Each valuer may be given different values, since valuation is an opinion. What is the valuation? What if the valuations are too much in variance? How to handle such a situation, since the time available to third value will be very little. So, is liquidator responsible for the valuation given by valuers? Definitely no. But the responsibility of the RP or liquidator is only to give all the information to the valuer. Now, the valuer takes his own principles of valuation and all the guidelines and all the rules, regulations and all that, based on which they'll make their own valuation, because at the end of the day, valuation is still an opinion only. Okay. So the RP's responsibility is only to give the inputs. Now, as a valuer also, we should ask him all the information that is required. So you should ask him, give me the balance sheet copy, analysis of the receivables, confirmation of balances in respect of cash and bank balances. Like that, you have to ask in the entire information. And the RP's duty is to give the information, and the valuation is your duty. So, and especially if and this also, this last paragraph I discussed, what if the valuations are too much in variance, how to handle such a situation. Since the time available to third valuer, suppose I am appointed as a third valuer, then the time available to me will be very less, because the first two valuers should have consumed 90% of the time. The third valuer will have very little time there. So normally what the valuers or the RP does is that when the valuation variance is too high, normally he speaks to each of the valuers and ensures that the gap is less, but there's not a, but at the same time, he can't make both the valuers sit together and decide among themselves. That he can't do. Is the high valuation good or low valuation good? So actually the valuation should be as per the policy, as per the rules, regulations, market conditions and all that. You can't value high or too low. In fact, a high valuation is bad in the sense that, see, what happens is that ultimately, why are we doing the valuation? We are doing the valuation to get a bid. See, the RP is trying to get a bid from a third party for the company. And if that is actually market determined. Suppose today we feel that some share is worth say 100 rupees, and the market determines today the share is worth 100 or 50 or 60. So market is always right. That's a general statement we all make. So if the market decides that a particular company is worth say 100 rupees, and the valuer in their own theoretical knowledge makes a valuation of 200 rupees or 300 rupees, then what he's essentially doing is that he's doing more damage to the whole situation than good. Because once he gives a valuation report of 200, and the market decides that the value is only worth 100, company is only worth 100, then the company will automatically go into liquidation, because the COC, the committee of creditors, which has to decide on the issue, they are having a number of 200 against which a bid of only 100, and they can't agree, they cannot admit the or accept that bid. So that company will automatically go into dissolution, liquidation. So actually high valuation is bad. So, and another thing is that even if you give a low valuation, market will anyway determine its own value. So that definitely will give a better value. Can the valuer guarantee the transaction will happen at the reported value? Suppose you are doing a valuation. So can we guarantee that? No, we are not a broker in that sense. Okay, we are only doing a valuation of the company. Now it may be more, it may become less, but we can't guarantee that value. Suppose you make a valuation of 200 and the company gets only 100 rupees bids. Then the RP can't turn around and say that you got a valuation of 200, now get me a buyer for that. He can't say that. Okay. So as a valuer, our responsibility is only to give a reasonable price, reasonable valuation. But at the same time, we are not guaranteeing. All of us have done that, but none of us guarantee that for that value, if the, as I said, no, the RP turns around and says that, okay, you have fixed a value of 200, okay, get me a buyer for that. He can't say that.
Sir, who all knows this value given by valuation valuer?
Pardon me?
Who all knows the value given by valuer?
Now, what happens is that the valuer gives the report to the RP, resolution professional, or the liquidator who is appointing him.
Right.
Okay. Now, once the RP, resolution professional, what he does is that, okay, he keeps the figure with him. He keeps the report with him alone. Then he is parallelly is calling for the bids for the company, right? So when he gets the bids for the company, suppose you give a valuation report of 100. So that is in his dryers only, is in locker only. Now he gets a bids. Now somebody gives 90, somebody gives 100, somebody gives 150 rupees bids. Now he out of the 3 bids, he places before the committee of creditors. When he places the bids with the committee of creditors, and it's parallelly, he'll also give this valuation report to the committee of creditors. So the committee of creditors knows the number. They know the valuation number. At the same time, they also know the bids that have come in. Now they compare the bids with the valuation report. Whichever bid is normal course, whichever bid is higher than the liquidation value or the fair value or liquidation value, that will be approved by them. That is the purpose. So to answer your first question, who all knows means RP will know it, committee of creditors will know it. That's it. The resolution applicant will not know that. The bidder, he will not know that, not that number.
So can you just check the chat box?
What I mean? One second. Anything special? Tell me, madam. I am not able to.
No problem, sir. We were just wondering if you can wind up the session, some
Okay.
question answer session.
Right, right. I was under 4-5 slides only.
Please answer this question.
How to value the financial assets if the updated books of accounts are not available? So ideally speaking, this is the biggest problem we face in most of the cases. So the financial assets of the balance sheets are not up to date, which means that normally all the financial assets are zero, because if the balance sheet is not up to date, then you are not sure of the debtors, creditors, or the bank balance, because bank balance anyways you get a confirmation from bank only, but most of the other assets would have been zero value. So but still we have to give a valuation for that. So it's a really tough job. That happens in most of our cases where we don't get the updated books of accounts or updated audited balance sheet. Still we are supposed to do it. Whereas fixed assets is easy. Fixed assets anyway you can verify the fixed asset. For that you'll get the invoices, bills, or title deeds kind of everything. Based on that you can do it. But for financial assets, if the balance sheet is not up to date, 99% chance are that all these assets are valued zero.
So can we say that in absence of required information, the asset have been valued zero?
99% chances, yes, madam. That's why what we normally do is that what the valuer has to do is that day one he has to send out a list to the RP saying that you give me all the information. Out of that he will say, okay, again RP can't create information on his own. What he is depending only on the management. But in many cases, no, the company does not have an accountant and all the old people would have gone and all that kind of a thing. In which cases he will find it difficult to do the valuation. So to give the information to the valuer. So valuer, obviously RP doesn't get, so RP can't give to the valuer.
So how long should we wait in absence of valuers, in absence of IP's reply, how long should we wait for this? I
said, no, madam, see, I said as a valuer, you'll get almost like 100 days to complete the whole thing because you are appointed on 37th day. And you have something like by around 120, 130 day, he has to get the plans. So you should plan within that period. So you may give him another, once you get the assignment, you give him a list. Once you give the list, wait for say 10, 15 days or 20 days. So he'll give the information. Over and about that, you can ask some more information, again ask it. So this process may take you another 30, 40 days. So maximum 60 days, you should complete it.
Okay.
Sir, with due respect, if there is no updated balance sheet reports, anything is there, why will anyone appoint a SFA valuer to get a value as zero then?
No, but supposing today we are in March 20. Okay, I have only a balance sheet of March 17 or March 16. That is showing receivables. Okay, that is showing some TDS receivable, GST, mark, actual receivables, debtors, creditors, and all that. Once the asset is there, I have to appoint. That you have to appoint, sir. See, RP is not doing a valuation. RP is only taking the assistance of a valuer to value.
So my understanding is when the RP takes over the account, he has to make the provisional balance sheet and P&L till the date of insolvency commencement date or nearest to that point.
Management has to do it. Management has to do it. Okay.
Yeah, IRP is the management when he takes over.
IRP is not the management, sir. The old management has to do. IRP comes in just now. How can he understand what happened in 2018-19? Suppose I am an appointed RP. I am an appointed RP on 1st January 2020. How will I prepare a balance sheet of March 18, March 19? No, we are not. We can't do this.
Agreed. What IRP does then, basically in the provisional statement, because nothing is available and you don't have anything on the ground, he would actually come with a statement which says that there are no assets or technical assets are zero because there's no assets for the last 2-3 years. Then there's no question of he appointing a SFA. That's
that logic is wrong. That logic is not correct. If there are assets, if there are financial assets as in March 16, March 17 or any other old balance sheet, you have to appoint. Then see, we are appointing on 37th day. Okay, then RP has full 180 days turn to do all the process. So maybe in the next 60 days or 70 days, you may be able to get the balance sheet done also by the management. So additional information may come, we may complete the balance sheets also. No, during our course of CRP period also, I have done several old balance sheets also updated. That has been happening. If you don't appoint within 37 days, after say 60th day, old balance sheets are updated, then what will you do? You are not appointed the valuer within 37 days. No, that becomes a violation.
So, I think it's 47th day.
Pardon, sir?
Maybe you're right, but RP
47th day.
No, actually 37th day. If not 37th, maximum is 47th day. He has to appoint.
So maybe you're right. My understanding was RP is a fiduciary duty first does the preliminary audit, and based on that he has to take the business call because the company is already dead. He should not incur any cost which is unreasonable. any valuer appointment is a cost to the company. So
Sorry, for that matter, if I can't appoint a KPMG or E&Y for charging 1 lakh, I can appoint a small valuer with a lesser fees also. So don't see, then there are several IBC guidelines which say that cost is, because of cost, you can't say that I did not appoint somebody. Okay, that's another problem.
If RP is convinced that the valuation is not required at all, I think he should go to the NCLT for the direction and get
NCLT will not give any direction. I am sure NCLT will not give any such direction.
Yeah, they are not normally, if they are not giving.
NCLT will say that. NCLT will say that you use your discretion. You appoint somebody.
Yes, Mr. Sarogi, you are right. RP has to use his discretion as a right, and he has to take a call.
Suppose tomorrow his discretion is wrong, then he has to face it.
Then he has to face the museum.
So the so the safety demands that we should appoint.
Okay,
right.
Normally appoints. And in many of the cases, they could not provide any information. Company went into liquidation. They didn't provide any information. Valuation was not done.
And then valuation was not done. So the liquidator has to take a decision whether to appoint or not.
See, the principle why I'm questioning this entire process is the entire liquidation value is a benchmark or for the potential resolution applicant. Right. And when the RP, because of the provisional audit he did in the first 30-35 days, and he knows that there are no assets at all available in the provisional audit, then like forcibly getting a valuation done based on the old data, which value is completely erroneous, then the entire resolution process goes for a toss.
No, so it's not that way, sir. It's not that way. If the value, if you don't appoint a valuer, you don't get a value. If you don't get a value, the COC does not have a benchmark against which it can measure the debt, measure the bids. It doesn't get a benchmark figure against which it can measure a bid. So that's why the evaluation has to be done. Whether less, more, zero, whatever it is, some valuation has to be done so that, okay, if they make a zero as a valuation also, suppose somebody is willing to give 100 rupees also, it is worth to give the company to that fellow. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
It's always better to appoint a valuer. Whether RP safety also is that tomorrow somebody should not say that you thought it is zero value, but definitely there is some hidden value in the company. It would have given some value. Okay, that kind of thing. That's okay. Where valuation report can be given by the valuer to bank auditors, company auditors, resolution applicants? No. But normally, okay, this again, there's another issue where the books of accounts are audited. The statutory auditor have to restate the balance sheet with realizable values if the company is not a going concern, and hence the auditor may ask for valuation report. See, if you see the Companies Act and the accounting standards and all that, the general understanding of a balance sheet is that company is a going concern. So you value the assets at a cost or market value, whichever is lower. But if the company is already in liquidation, all the company's assets have to be restated at the realization value only, for which the auditor may also ask the valuer for the valuation report, but valuer should not give anything. Normally the RP also not supposed to give, but that's anyway discretion of the RP. So valuer, so if the auditor asks the valuer, you should not give. Okay. Similarly, bank auditors or resolution applicants, anybody asks him, valuer is not supposed to give it. Is there any action against the valuer for high-low valuation? No. Consequences if the valuers do not refer to any method of valuation, etc. Actually, the valuation report should contain the details of how he has done. Normally IVS standards, no, or the valuation rules are there. He says that you need to say all what method you adopted and all that. So if you don't discuss all these things and give some round number, then NCLT can direct the valuer to value the intangible assets properly, all the assets properly, and appoint a fresh valuer. So when your report, again, your report should discuss the entire, as per rules, no, you have to discuss the basis, what you have done, or premises, what you have done, accept, taken, all those things you have to mention your report. Then how to give a fee quote. Fee quote, normally, as I said, one limited info with limited, say on this, when he's appointing in a 37th day, then the RP has a limited information. So based on that only, he's asking us for a quote. But suddenly you find that some additional asset is there, some additional work is there, additional work has improved, or as somebody was saying that if suddenly you find that the inventory requires additional appointment of sub consultants kind of a thing, then scope may go up. So normally if the additional scope is there, you may have to ask for additional. So with this given scope, this is the fees quote. If there is additional scope, then the scope will increase. Several is there. See, the RP may think that there only one subsidiary is there. okay, value it. So you may give a zero valuation. But then if the COC again wants that, no, you do a detailed valuation of a subsidiary may have assets, subsidiary may have income, then you make an assessment of the value of the subsidiary first, then include that figure in the main value. Then definitely the work will increase a lot. So considering these things, the initial quote should be given in such a way that if there is any additional work or scope, this is what we're going to do. If there is any additional work, then we'll charge extra. So that kind of thing can be kept. But that's for big companies. Then valuation fees. Then how do the RP regular, does he pay the fees on time? As I said again, valuation fees is the last priority on payment of additional professionals, since the interim finance is not normally available. For a closed company, you don't get any interim finance. In the IBC code, there is a concept of interim finance, which means that if the company does not have any income during the CRP process or liquidation process, the committee of creditors, who are normally the lenders to the financial creditors to the company, they are supposed to contribute for all these expenses. And 99% chances are that they don't contribute anything because they already feel that already they have lost their entire money. So they are supposed to put extra money into this. So the RP himself will be facing a problem of how to run the process by appointing valuers, forensic auditors, and his own fees and other expenses. But still, he may somehow manage it, but valuer fees will be difficult in that case. So what is the objective in that situation is that, however, valuer should ensure that his fees is approved by the committee of creditors, so that the valuation fees becomes a part of the, forms part of the, not COC, form part of the CRP cost. While quoting the fees, factor in delayed payment. So, and if it is CRP cost, you get priority in payment at the end. If it's not a CRP cost, it will not get priority. So the valuer should ensure that his fees is already put up to the CRP, committee of creditors, and get it ratified there. That is the duty of the, that you have to ensure that that happens. Then
how to ensure that we have to constantly keep on asking the RP about it?
Yes, you have to ask the RP, sir, did you take it to the COC meeting? Did you get the approval of the COC for the fees? Okay. If the fees is approved by COC, then it becomes a part of the CRP cost. In which case, you'll get a priority. Supposing the RP is not able to pay the fees during his tenure, at least it becomes a CRP cost, which gets a priority in case of a liquidation.
Is there any way we can cross-verify that?
No, you have to follow up with him. That's it. There's no, okay, I don't think you will be able to, will not, as a valuer, will not get the copies of the minutes of the COC meetings. But you have to ensure that. Okay. Otherwise, you see, the problem is that if it's not included there, then the problem is that tomorrow when the company goes into liquidation, then comes the liquidator who comes in, then no, he'll turn around and say that, sir, your expenditure is not approved with the COC. Then you will not get anything. Well, quoting the fees always factor for a delayed payment, but normally it is difficult. And actually, I had a doubt of this, the second part which I kept in this slide also. If the valuer is an MSMED, as a valuers, we can all register as MSMEDs.
Right.
Okay. Now, if you register yourself as MSMED and you raise your invoice, it is not paid, you get interest under MSMED Act. I doubt whether, okay, I just got that idea, I wrote it here, but I don't know whether I can do it really or not. But there's a chance. Or you may think that
amendment of services, yes.
No, even earlier also. Anyway, all of us practicing as registered valuers are practicing as chartered accountants. We're all coming under MSMED only.
Yeah, if the service level limits are maintained, yes.
Service level also now it is 5 crore. Now it's with the revised amendment 5 crore something, no?
Correct. Now it's therefore easy.
So that's there. So if you all register, then you can raise invoice, you can claim interest. If it comes, principal at least will come then. Then is there any validity period of the report? There is no question of validity report. Valuation report is as on the CRP commencement date. So the validity period and the subsequent events do not affect the report. Post COVID-19 is a fresh evaluation required? No. Separate valuation is not required, but COC should consider the effect of the COVID. Supposing 1st January is the CRP commencement date, we give a valuation report on that date. The code, the IBC code only provides for valuation at the CRP commencement date or again at the liquidation commencement date. You don't need to value for each event. Okay. So the COC should consider, but anyway, COC while getting when it gets a bid, it can take the effects of after effects of the COVID or kind of a thing. SC has also decided that resolution plan can be less than the valuation report, the valuation done by the registered valuer. So that SC also has Supreme Court also has considered and decided in some cases, saying that even if the plan is less than the valuation report value what is given by the valuers, still it can be accepted by the committee.
Can the fair value be less than the liquidation value?
So that's what we discussed in the beginning also. See, what happens is, that's why if you take, suppose, that's what I gave the example of that Galaxy Theatre kind of a thing. Suppose when the theatre, if you want to run the cinema business only, then the fair value of a cinema business will be less. And the liquidation value, if it's converted into a liquidation and then make another commercial complex there, no, that value will be more. So that's why.
So, but at the end of the day, you also mentioned in your talk that the liquidation value does not presume that to be a going concern.
Right.
So if the liquidation value is not to be considered as a going concern during the CIRP process, I'm not talking of the liquidation, because liquidation, it can be still as a going concern. But during the CIRP, if the liquidation value is supposed to be only the liquidation value and not the value as a going concern, in that eventuality, can the land and building or the plant and machinery of that not be construed as basically the habu for the present business only? And therefore, if it is a habu, at the end of the day, the structure on the habu quite clearly is that it can't be used beyond that particular theatre or otherwise.
No, so that's what I said. No, suppose you have cinema theatre in the city center, which is not doing well. So better to convert a commercial complex if the rules permit that kind of a thing there. Supposing you have, that's what I said. Suppose you are in an industrial estate. That industrial estate industry may not be doing well, but you can't convert into real estate because the rules don't permit. So there, no, it has to be some other industry only. But if it is a real estate, it is a cinema theatre which is in the city center, and cinema theatre is not doing well, then the Habu principle works out and says that instead of a cinema theatre running company, you convert into a commercial estate only, commercial building only. So in that, yeah, otherwise, what you said, that comes into picture, because the fair value will become too less, and the alternative of liquidation value, which is converting into a real estate commercial complex, no, that will become more.
Right. So that will be too high. In which eventuality, what would then be the scenario in the waterfall? Because if the liquidation value is far higher than the fair value, and the company basically has to distribute the assets on liquidation under Section 53, would the liquidation value then apply for the operational creditors too?
Sir, whether definitely. See, liquidation value, whatever liquidation value is assessed by the valuer, that applies for Section 53. That is the benchmark. For Section 53, that is the benchmark. Okay.
Yeah.
Who has to value the inventory? Traditionally, chartered accountants have been valuing. This we all discussed. Whether to comply with IBS standards or IBC requirements, IBS standards have to be complied, except where specific exemptions, additional requirements of IBC. That is given in the IBS standards itself, saying that unless specifically accepted, provided somewhere, you have to generally provide the IBS standards. And since IBC is a specific requirement, something else is required here, you have to do that. That will be an exception to the main report. Only RP should appoint valuers, not COC. See, the appointment has to come from the RP only. COC can't appoint, because as per IBBA also, RP only has to appoint. RP can't delegate his duty to COC. Valuer should only value the properties owned by CD, not that of guarantors or subsidiaries. Sometimes, no, they'll ask you what is the value of the subsidiary. Okay, subsidiary means the holding company investment subsidiary. That shares only has to be valued. You can't value the, okay, for that purpose, you may have to take up the valuation of the subsidiary. But supposing the guarantee is given by some collateral, some associate company, you need not value those assets of those companies. That is not required, because they are
coming back to the point. Sir, sorry, coming back to the point, if the investment concerns subsidiaries, then we have to value the subsidiaries also.
True, because you have to arrive at a value of the share, no? But sometimes, many times in this kind of cases, what happens is that the subsidiary would have been heavily borrowed. Okay, in which case the value for the shareholder is 0. That is a straightforward answer. But suppose this subsidiary is doing well, then you have to value the subsidiary.
Suppose if the investment in subsidiaries, 6 subsidiaries are there, all the 6 subsidiaries form part of the main valuation. That's what you're saying.
Right.
Correct?
You have to do that.
All the 6 subsidiaries we have to value.
You have to do that. If the holding company has investment in 6 subsidiaries, then all 6 subsidiaries have to be valued. That you have to quote it at the time of so before quoting, actually you should take the balance sheet of the company to have an assessment of what is there in that company.
No, but sir, in the case of the subsidiary valuation, the short point is that subsidiary valuation would normally, being in the investment structure in my balance sheet, be in the domain of the SFA valuer. Right. Having said that, the subsidiary may per se have a lot of land building and plant and machinery. Would I then wanting to mark to market those assets of the SFA of the subsidiary? will I have to subsequently go down to the plant and machinery and the land and building valuers of the subsidiary?
So that's why, sir, when you quote for this kind of large companies, better take the balance sheet, understand it, then only quote. Because see how to value a company.
No,
See,
no,
so let me complete, sir. So when you're valuing a subsidiary, you have to value it as an independent company. Okay, independent company, how do you value? You have again income approach, market approach, cost approach. So all those approaches you have to apply for that and arrive at a share value. That share value has to be brought into this main company.
My view is that IBC prevents you to actually look at beyond the company per se, and therefore the valuation of subsidiary is not your domain vis-a-vis the other assets. So it has to be kind of investment.
We need to value the subsidiaries as well. In one of the case, I have appointed the other registered valuer and got their valuation done, and thereafter I have valued the subsidiary companies.
No, sir, but why will the subsidiary permit the valuer to do that? Why would
that's
the
the holding
subsidiary
company's job. No,
the RP to do that?
No, sir, holding company is the main person. No, okay. Even if you are a minority holder, if the holding company is a minority holder in a subsidiary, still it has to get the old balance sheets or something. Based on that, it has to do.
No, sir. Sir, I don't think so, because there are 3 judgments. Now, my view is that the shareholders in the subsidiary, you are only a shareholder to the extent of 51%.
51%.
Right?
Suppose you are 20% only. Then what will you do?
No, sir. In that eventuality, you are not a subsidiary, because if you are not in the control and management, or you don't have the right to appoint a board.
You are not a subsidiary. You are not a subsidiary, but definitely your 20% also is worth something.
Sir, that 20% in any case will have to be done basically not by actually valuing the assets, because those people will deny that. We have had a case. where the subsidiaries were denied.
No, but at least you should have the balance sheets and all that. Sir, you should have the balance sheets and other things of the company. Otherwise,
sir, balance sheet is fine. Balance sheet would only enable you to do a book market, the book value, or what is called typically the NAV. It will not permit you to do the mark-to-market structures.
But then, see, for doing that kind of in-depth analysis, you need the MIS reports of the subsidiary and maybe projections of subsidiaries and all that.
Right. But I don't think you can go to that. I don't think so, because IBC will prevent you from doing it. Because they will
then how do you value the subsidiary account company? Anyway, that's an issue, sir. That's an issue. Okay, you're right. Do you have 100% pakka valuation of a subsidiary? You need their MIS reports and then their projections and all that.
Correct.
Okay, that's it. But
so you will use the net asset value, sir. You don't do the projections there. You look at because in your corporate debtors books, it's only the book value. But you look at the net asset value of the subsidiary, and that is the value you will consider. You will not take any projections. You will take the net asset value.
No, but in that case, you will have an error in basically what is called the sanity check, because you will then not be following the IVS there.
Then you're not following the IVS there. That's right. You're not following the IVS standards there. Anyway, that's an issue, sir.
Considering the time, we can conclude.
Right. Anyway, these are the issues. See, basically, the subject given to me is very simple. My objective is only to give the problems only. Anyway, we have so many problems in this each one, right? Appointment of same value for 4 consecutive assignments of RP. Okay, actually there are some cases this happened. If one of my friend is an RP, then I take all his assignments as a valuer. That gives an assumption that they are together. So that has to be avoided. If a CD has a subsidiary and the shares of subsidiary held by CD, then the minority percentage. Okay, that we all discussed now. If you are a valuer during the CRP, and the liquidator proposes to take up fresh evaluation, RP normally is supposed to appoint a new valuer. Supposing the liquidator appoints and decides to again appoint a valuer, ideally speaking, he should not appoint the same valuers. He should appoint a other valuer. Not so. So that's why if you are a valuer in a CRP process, don't take up a valuation during the liquidation process also.
But in case in CRP process, the valuation process was not undertaken at all, even after the appointment, he can appoint the same valuer.
Then I think there is no problem. Then also I doubt, because what happens is that then as a valuer you failed in to deliver within the stipulated period.
Not a single document was provided by the RP. So
no,
that was not the failure of the valuer.
No, then knowing that, why will you take up again in the liquidation? Because the liquidation again, he is not going to give you a document then.
That is there.
Anyway, that's a tricky thing. But ideally speaking, you should not take up.
Okay? Yeah.
Is the premise forced to liquidation or order liquidation? It's an orderly liquidation, because during liquidation process, the liquidator is actually doing an orderly liquidation, not a forced liquidation, because you have sufficient time, sufficient market, you're doing a e-auction and all that. Okay. Then company industry specific challenges. Okay, there are okay, there'll be industries. Okay, each one is each assignment will be different. We all know that. So if it's a power plant, then there is specific challenges. If it's an EPC contract company, there will be so many challenges in each of them. Then if you're a mining telecom companies, airline companies, each of them have their own challenges. Real estate companies have their own challenges. Projects that can be completed cannot be completed. Similarly, software companies have their own challenges. Whether software code is available, hardware is has any value. Some certain hardware may be specific to a particular industry only, particular this one only. Because I was one software company I had done that, where the entire software hardware was bought some 4 or 5 years ago. All those companies don't have warranty. All this software hardware doesn't have warranty, guarantee anything. And some of the companies have merged with, some of the suppliers have merged with some other companies. And they said there are specific to particular line of activity only, which nobody is using. So all those problems will be there for software companies. And the companies which have only one buyer, one seller, they have typical problems. Then if a company has to be valued as a going concern, okay, this we all discussed. If a company has to be valued as a going concern, can the SFA valuer, P&M valuer, LNB valuer can alone give such a valuation for their respective class of assets instead of considering the corporate data as a whole? Then how can each class valuer give the valuation report? So if a company has to be given a going concern actually assumes that there is a synergy effect also for all these activities. So no company can only SFA valuer can't give a going concern value, but still it has to be done. So there is a problem that has to be challenged. Then last slide.
We can take only just one question, final question.
I think we have answered or taken up almost all the questions during the course only. If anything else is there, we can discuss.
Sir, just some decision on this subsidiaries, sir. If there is a lot of subsidiaries on the balance sheet, what is the fair approach so that our skin is saved?
Sir, see the subsidiary has to be valued as per IBS standards only. If you are valuing, even if you have 10% shareholding in the company, holding company has only, the main company has only 10% holding in subsidiary, still that 10% has to be valued. For that matter, if the holding company having 50-60%, okay, the directors will command as power on that subsidiary. So they will try to get the information. But if it is not, if it's the other way, if it's only 10-20%, the other company does not give any information, still you have to get it, but that has to build up into your costing of this one, and you should tell the RP to get the information. See, your job is to you don't go to subsidiary company, you to go ask the RP to give the information. RP can't get it, that's his problem. Then you can put it in your report also, saying that I asked RP 3 times, he did not give. Based on that only we did the evaluation. That's how it works.
So one more thing, see why we are getting this subsidiary valuation we have to do. See, in a case where I invested some 2-3 crores, like just I can leave the 2-3 crores. As a valuer, we have to do like, okay, if our work is more or less, we have to do it. We can't just leave that investment, whatever the corporate data has made. In one assignment where the company has invested in South Africa, in 2 companies, even we did valuation of the South Africa companies also. We have taken whether the companies are there or not, and we have valued those companies.
That improves your CV, Subbarao.
Yeah.
It may not be worth or not worth, it only improves your CV.
See, as a valuer, okay, we have accepted for less amount, or whether if we are doing more work, at end we have to do
justice, right?
Valuation.
Right, that's right.
IBS standard says that if you have projections given, then only DCF. If the management is not giving projections and there are no market multiples available, then you use a net asset value. That's all you are supposed to do as a valuer in the RP case, CIRP case. You cannot force someone that give me the projections. If the projections are not being given, that's your reference statement. Market multiples are not available, then you go back with the net asset value.
Right. So you discuss all this in your report only. The ideal situation market method, ideal income method is correct. But in this case, income projections were not given by the RP. So we have to go by the asset method. Something like that, you have to justify it and then do it.
See, if there are subsidiaries of listed company, we can go by market approach and then close it simply.
Listed company is simple, no sir. Anyway, you have listed value only and the CRP commencement date. Listed company is a straightforward question.
Okay.
I think we are not competent to value the overseas assets. In that case, the RP need to appoint a separate valuer for the overseas assets.
That has to pay him dollars also, man.
Yeah. Sir, why we are not eligible, sir? Even we can do valuation of foreign companies also.
Foreign company also. Are we eligible for that?
Why not, sir? Even one listed where I have given one valuation report for a listed company where they invested in a UK company. Now the auditor is asking for valuation of that UK company. As a valuer, we have given that UK company valuation. We can do it.
We can do it, I think. I think there's no harm.
Now I would request Mr. Chetan for a formal vote of thanks.
So before he does, sir, can you share your PPT in the group?
Yes, I'll put it in the group. I'll put it in the group.
Come from different.
I'll put it in the group, right?
It was a nice presentation and discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Share that, sir,
lot of clarity.
Chat box, I don't know how to do, but I'll immediately put in the valuation group only. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you for the time.
Thanks, Shilpa. Thank you, Ravi Shankar, sir, for such an insightful and wonderful presentation on IBC concepts. It's always knowledge enriching experience whenever we have a chat with you or we attend your session. This session helped all the participants, in enriching their knowledge with regard to IBC concepts. You helped, in doing that by covering the definition of fair value and liquidation value under IBC and also under IVS with illustrations, possibility of using DCF in CIRP process, provisions with regard to appointment of RV, conduct of RVs in IBC scenario, and also you touched upon valuation under liquidation and also the practical problems or challenges which are faced in IBC valuation, and also you gave a possible solutions as well. Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks again for your valuable time.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Please join our next session tomorrow, 8 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the session.
Okay.